is to keep things brief, in the sense that we're not going, because Genesis is 50 chapters long. And if you guys know how I like to get into a study, my wife was like, you're going to take 2 years to get through Genesis. 10 years, yeah. So the goal is actually to really get out of the weeds, and we want to take a large view. So my goal is to do more of an overview of Genesis. I want you to get the highlights of Genesis. We're not going to go verse by verse. We're not going to go chapter by chapter. We're going to go topic by topic, is kind of more the way that we're going to go through the book of Genesis. So there will be weeks where we will cover one chapter. There will be weeks where we will cover 4 or 5 chapters. So we're going to it's just going to kind of depend on what's within the text. And I'm going to encourage you to go home and to read and to study and to look at that and ask questions. I do want to encourage you to ask questions. Please raise your hand. I will stop. I will clarify. And you guys are welcome to try to stretch out the class longer if you would like. But please ask questions. Make sure that I am being clear on what I'm saying and the points that I'm making. There's a number of debates. There's a number of disagreements that go on within the book of Genesis. So, I definitely want to address those to at least some extent. And I want to make sure that I'm clarifying my position and what other positions are and answering any questions you might have. This is going to be more of a lectureship style than it has been, where I'm asking open-ended questions and I'm looking to just have dialogue. This space is really hard to have dialogue because we're all spread out, even though I've pushed us to the back. And this space is really hard because it's so vaulted and it's so large, and most of us are hard of hearing, including myself. So that it really does not lend itself well to the discussion style classes that I enjoy having. So we're going to try a lectureship style. It's not my normal style of teaching, so bear with me in that. The other thing I wanted to point out as we get started into this new study is my goal is to have a handout for each class. I want it to be a text light handout. I want it to be visually appealing, brief, and beneficial. That's my goal when it comes to these handouts. To that extent, I'm not going to provide the binder. You're welcome to go pick up a binder or grab one at home or get one of those paper ones, that you can add to. But I did go ahead and create a quick cover page for everybody, so you're welcome to pick those up. I printed off 10. We'll probably need more than that. So I'll get a head count and figure out exactly how much each week I need to print. But I started off with 10 or 15. So there's the cover page. And like I said, I'm trying to make these visually appealing and text light. So here's an overview of the book of Genesis, right? So there's that one. And then, of course, we have a page on Moses on the back because he's the author. So that's kind of the handout. I'll have these up here. You can pick them up after class, and I'll try to have them out and about. We have several reams of this hole punched paper, so it's really easy for me to just make sure that all the text fits in the proper spot and then just hit print. So that way, those of you who want it in your 3-ring binder or in another format, that's why that's there. So as class completes, you should walk away with a really nice handout, is my hope. And I encourage you to take notes and write and create something for yourself that is a benefit to you. Okay, so questions so far? Just kind of laying out the class. Boy, I'm covering everything great. Nobody has any questions. It's awesome. All right. So now that we've gone over the syllabus, for those of you who don't remember, that's professor talk for the expectations of the class. We're going to start off by looking at two videos. The Bible Project has put out two videos giving an overview of the book of Genesis. So we're going to watch both back to back. He's going to cover the first half of the book in the first video, and then he'll cover the second half of the book in the second video. And then I'm going to just kind of go over some of the key facts, some of the key statistics. And like I said, you guys have questions, please raise your hand, and I will address those as best as I can. Let's see here. Turn that on. That's always helpful. All right. So that's what we're going to cover. 1 through 11. 8 minutes. Here we go.
The book of Genesis is the first book of the Bible, and its storyline divides into two main parts. There's chapters 1 through 11, which tell the story of God. The book of Genesis is the first book of the Bible, and its storyline divides into two main parts. There's chapters 1 through 11, which tell the story of God and the whole world. And then there's chapters 12 through 50, which zoom in and tell the story of God and just one man, Abraham, and then his family. And these two parts are connected by a hinge story at the beginning of chapter 12. And this design, it gives us a clue to how to understand the message of the book as a whole and how it introduces the story of the whole. The book of Genesis, it's the first book of the Bible, God and the whole world. And then there's chapters 12 through 50, which zoom in and tell the story of God and just one man, Abraham, and then his family. And these two parts are connected by a hinge story at the beginning of chapter 12. And this design, it gives us a clue to how to understand the message of the book as a whole and how it introduces the story of the whole Bible. So the book begins with God taking the disorder and the darkness described in the second sentence of the Bible, and God brings out of it order and beauty and goodness. He makes a world where life can flourish. And God makes these creatures called humans, or Adam in Hebrew. He makes them in his image, which has to do with their role and purpose in God's world. So the humans are made to be reflections of God's character out into the world, and they're appointed as God's representatives to rule his world on his behalf, which in context means to harness all of its potential, to care for it, and make it a place where even more life can flourish. God blesses the humans. It's a key word in this book. And he gives them a garden. It's like a place from which they begin starting to build this new world. Now, the key is that the humans have a choice about how they're going to go about building this world. And that's represented by the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Up till now, God has provided and defined what is good and what is not good. But now God is giving the humans the dignity and the freedom of a choice. Are they going to trust God's definition of good and evil, or are they going to seize autonomy and define good and evil for themselves? And the stakes are really high. To rebel against God is to embrace death, because you're turning away from the giver of life himself. This is represented by the tree of life. And so in chapter 3, a mysterious figure, a snake, enters into the story. The snake's given no introduction other than it's a creature that God made. And it becomes clear that it's a creature in rebellion against God, and it wants to lead the humans into rebellion and their death. The snake tells a different story about the tree and the choice. It says that seizing the knowledge of good and evil are not going to bring death, that it's actually the way to life and becoming like God themselves. Now, the irony of this is tragic, because we know the humans, they're already like God. They were made to reflect God's image. But instead of trusting God, the humans seize autonomy, they take the knowledge of good and evil for themselves, and in an instant, the whole story spirals out of control. The first casualty is human relationships. The man and the woman, they suddenly realize how vulnerable they are. Now, they can't even trust each other. And so they make clothes and they hide their bodies from one another. The second casualty is that intimacy between God and the humans is lost. So they go and run and hide from God, and then when God finds them, they start this game of blame shifting about who rebelled first. Now right here the story stops, and there's a series of short poems where God declares to the snake and then to the humans the tragic consequences of their actions. God first tells the snake that despite its apparent victory, it is destined for defeat, to eat dust. God promises that one day a seed or a descendant will come from the woman who's going to deliver a lethal strike to the snake's head, which sounds like great news, but this victory is going to come with a cost because the snake too will deliver a lethal strike to the descendant's heel as it's being crushed. It's a very mysterious promise of this wounded victor. But in the flow of the story so far, you see this is an act of God's grace. The humans, they've just rebelled, and what does God do? He promises to rescue them. But this doesn't erase the consequences of the humans' decision. So God informs them that now every aspect of their life together, at home and out in the field, it's going to be fraught with grief and pain because of the rebellion, all leading to their death. From here, the story then spirals downward. Chapters 3 through 11, they trace the widening ripple effect of the rebellion and of human relationships fracturing at every level. So there's a story about two brothers, Cain and Abel. Cain's so jealous of his brother that he wants to murder him. And God warns him not to give in to the temptation, but he does anyway. He murders him in the field. So Cain then goes on to build a city where violence and oppression reign. And this is all epitomized in the story of Lamech. He's the first man in the Bible to have more than one wife. He's accumulating them like property. And then he goes on to sing a short song about how he's more violent and vengeful than Cain ever was. After this, we get an odd story about the sons of God, which could refer to evil angelic beings, or it could refer to ancient kings who claimed that they descended from the gods. And like Lamech, they acquire as many wives as they wanted, and they produce the Nephilim, these great warriors of old. Whichever view is right, the point is that humans are building kingdoms that fill God's world with violence and even more corruption. In response, we're told that God is broken with grief. Humanity is ruining his good world, and they're ruining each other. And so out of a passion to protect the goodness of his world, he washes it clean of humanity's evil with a great flood. But he protects one blameless human, Noah, and his family, and he commissions him as a new Adam. He repeats the divine blessing and commissions him to go out into the world. And so our hopes are really high, but then Noah fails too, and also in a garden. He goes and he plants a vineyard, and he gets drunk out of his mind. And then one of his sons, Ham, does something shameful to his father in the tent. And so here we have our new Adam, naked and ashamed, just like the first, and the downward spiral begins again. It all leads to the foundation of the city of Babylon. The people of ancient Mesopotamia, they come together around this new technology they have, the brick. And they can make cities and towers bigger and faster than anybody's ever done before. And they want to build a new kind of tower that will reach up to the gods, and they will make a great name for themselves. It's an image of human rebellion and arrogance. It's the garden rebellion now writ large. And so God humbles their pride and scatters them. Now this is a diverse group of stories, but you can see they're all exploring the same basic point. God keeps giving humans the chance to do the right thing with his world, and humans keep ruining it. These stories are making a claim that we live in a good world that we have turned bad, that we've all chosen to define good and evil for ourselves, and so we all contribute to this world of broken relationships, leading to conflict and violence and ultimately death. But there's hope. God promised that one day a descendant would come, the wounded victor who will defeat evil at its source. And so despite humanity's evil, God is determined to bless and rescue his world. And so the big question, of course, is what is God going to do? And the next story, The Hinge, offers the answer. But for now, that's what Genesis 1 through 11 is all about. The book of Genesis. In the first video, we saw how chapters 1 through 11 set up the basic storyline of the Bible. God has created all things, and he makes humans in his image to rule the world on his behalf. The humans choose sin and rebellion, and so the world spins out of control into violence and death, all leading up to the rebellion and scattering of the people in Babylon. And so the big question is, what is God going to do to rescue and redeem his world? Well, out of that scattering at Babylon, the author traces a genealogy of just one family that leads eventually to a man named Abram, later known as Abraham. And God's promise to Abraham at the beginning of chapter 12 opens up a whole new movement in the story. God calls Abraham to leave his home and go to the land of Canaan, which God says will become his one day. And in that land, God promises to make Abraham into a great nation, to make his name great, and to bless him. Now, these promises are connected back to earlier parts of the book. So Babylon had arrogantly tried to make a great name for itself, and that didn't go over very well. But God, in his generosity, is going to bestow a great name on this no-name guy, Abraham. And God's blessing of Abraham echoes all the way back to that original blessing God gave humanity in the beginning. So the question is, why is God going to bless Abraham and his family? And the last line of God's promise makes this clear. So that all the families of the earth will find God's blessing in you. Now, this is key for understanding the whole rest of the biblical story. God's plan is to rescue and bless his rebellious world through Abraham's family. And this is why the whole rest of the Old Testament story is just going to focus on this one family, eventually called the people of Israel. This is also why Israel will later be called a kingdom of priests at Mount Sinai. God wants to use them to show all of the other nations what he's like. And ultimately, this is the promise that gets picked up by the later biblical prophets and poets who say that its fulfillment will come through Israel's messianic king, whose reign will bring justice and peace to all of the nations. Now, at this point of the story, none of that's clear. You just have to keep reading and watch the promise develop. And so the rest of the book focuses on Abraham and his family. First, Abraham himself, then his son Isaac, and then his son Jacob, and then Jacob's 12 sons. And the stories about each generation, they're united by two main themes. So first, each generation of Abraham's family is marked by repeated failure. They just keep making really bad decisions that mess up their lives and that put God's promise in jeopardy. However, God remains faithful to them. He keeps rescuing them from themselves and reaffirming his commitment to bless them and bless the nations through them despite their failings. So the Abraham stories. God had promised Abraham a huge family, but on two different occasions, he's afraid for his life because other men are attracted to his wife, and so he denies that he's even married to her, which creates, of course, all of these problems. And not only that, Abraham and his wife Sarah, they can't have children, and so Sarah arranges for Abraham to sleep with one of their servant girls, which also creates all of these problems in the family. But each time, God bails Abraham out. And in chapters 15 and 17, God even formalizes his promise to Abraham with an official commitment called a covenant. This is a classic scene. God invites Abraham to look up at the night stars and to count them. And he says, that's how numerous your family's going to be. And despite all of the odds, having no kids and no way to have any at the moment, Abraham looks up in the sky and simply trusts God's promise. And God responds by entering into a covenant with Abraham, promising that he will become a father of many nations, that God's blessing may come to the whole world. God asks Abraham to mark his family with a sign of the covenant, circumcision of all the male boys in the family. This is a symbol to remind them that the fruitfulness of their family is a gift from God. And so Abraham has lots of kids eventually, and he dies at a good old age. Now, the Jacob stories play out these themes even more dramatically. From birth, Jacob lives up to the meaning of his name, which is deceiver. He cheats his brother Esau out of his inheritance and blessing, and he does it by deceiving his old blind father, no less, and then he just takes off. He goes on to take 4 wives, even though he really only loves one, Rachel, and this creates all of these rivalries in the family. The only thing that humbles Jacob is being deceived by his uncle Laban, who cheats him out of years of his life. The tables have finally turned. And so it's a humbled Jacob that returns to his homeland. And in a very strange story, Jacob ends up wrestling with God as he demands that God bless him. Some things never really change, do they? However, God honors his determination, and he passes Abraham's blessing on to him. And he renames Jacob as Israel, which means wrestles with God. Now, it's this last part of the book, the story of Jacob's sons, where all the themes come to a head. Jacob loves his second to youngest son, Joseph, more than any of the others, and he gives him this special jacket. And the 10 older sons come to hate Joseph, and so they kidnap him, and they plan to kill him, but instead they decide to just sell him into slavery in Egypt, where he ends up in prison. Talk about family failure. But God is with Joseph, and he orchestrates Joseph's release from prison, and Pharaoh ends up elevating Joseph to second in command over all of Egypt. And so Joseph saves the nation of Egypt during a famine. And he also ends up saving his brothers and his family from starving to death. And so once again, we can see the folly and the sin of Abraham's family is met with God's faithfulness, who subverts even the evil of the brothers into an occasion to save life. And this is actually what Joseph says right near the end of the book. He says to his brothers, "You all planned this for evil, but God planned it for good, to save many lives." Now, these words are strategically placed at the end of the book because they summarize not only the story of Joseph and his brothers, but the book as a whole. From Genesis 3 onward, humans keep acting selfishly and doing evil, but this God is not going to leave his world to its own devices. He remains faithful and determined to bless people despite their failures. You can see this especially in how that mysterious promise about the descendant of the woman gets developed throughout the book. So remember, Genesis 3, God promised that this wounded victor would come and crush the snake and defeat evil at its source. And the author then connects this promise directly to the line of Abraham. This is a part of how God's going to bring his blessing to the nations. Now, from Abraham, this promise gets connected to Judah, the fourth son of Jacob. And this is how. In an extremely important poem in chapter 49, in aging Jacob, he's on his deathbed, he wants to bless his 12 sons. And when he comes to Judah, Jacob predicts that Judah will become the tribe of Israel's royal leaders, and that one day a king will come who will command the obedience of all the nations and fulfill God's promise to restore the garden blessing to all of the world. And then after this, Jacob dies. And later, Joseph dies too. And the growing family remains in Egypt. And so the book of Genesis ends with all of these future hopes and promises left hanging and undeveloped. And it forces you to turn the page to see how it's all going to turn out. But for now, that's the book of Genesis.
All right, you guys have all that? That's a lot, I know. I have included in the handout up here this poster. So you can go back and look at that and examine that more closely. These are also online. You can go on YouTube and you can find these videos and you can rewatch them to absorb all that information again and again as many times as you want. The videos are actually available for download for free. The Bible Project has great materials and great resources, and I highly recommend them. If you'll notice at the beginning of the videos it says read scripture. It has that plus sign. That's actually an app as well, and you can download that app, Read Scripture, and it will include these videos and other videos they've created along with a daily Bible reading plan that will walk you through the entirety of the scriptures in 1 year along with a psalm. So it's a great reading plan. It's very well developed. It's a great functioning app. Highly recommended if you're looking for something like that this year. So don't consider that it's too late to start. You can download that. It's just perfect for that daily Bible reading, keeping it kind of devotional, giving you that background information. So it's a great resource. BibleProject.org or .com, I forget which one. If you go to Google and you just type into whatever search engine you want to use, the Bible Project or Bible Project, it'll come up. And they've been operating for 10 years now, something like that. And they've just done a phenomenal job of developing and recruiting talent and things. And everything's crowdfunded, so it's just been churches and individuals who have supported them, and then they are able to give away everything they do for free, and it's great. All right. So, of course, like I said, I want you guys to ask questions. So let me see if I can go through some of the key facts here, some highlights. We're at 10,000 feet, okay? We're doing overview of the overview right now. So there's a lot of things we're going to get into. Some key facts about Genesis. Genesis is the beginning of all things. It doesn't give us the beginning of God, but it gives us the beginning of all things, everything He has created. All the things we're dealing with, all the challenges of this world, it answers and it sets up the beginning of those questions. So it really does handle the beginning of all things. It begins at the beginning. It begins with creation. Of course, there's a lot of debate around that, but it begins with creation, and it sets up this story to show God as the creator, God above it all, God blessing us, giving us everything that we need, and placing humanity as His image bearer. And we see then a story unfold that shows that we're all created and we're all equal. We're all descended from the same genes, from the same grandparents, and we're all related. Despite the rivalries, despite the conflicts, despite the disagreements that are going on in this world that go not only to words and arguments or distance between others, but to the point of wars, right? And actually annihilation of entire groups of people and all of these things. And it comes back to why, right? And it asks that question, right? The beginning of all things. And we see the entrance of sin into the world. And there's a really important study that's going to happen there in Genesis chapter 3. We also have the beginning of all nations, right? We see Ham, Shem, and Japheth as they exit the ark, as them and their father exit the ark and begin anew. We see God through the writings here laying out where each of these nation states are coming from, where the origin of these civilizations are coming from, so we can kind of track that and look at that and see where all these things come from, where the beginning of nation states and different groups are, the beginning of where language comes from as God disrupts this disobedience of, I'm not going to go throughout the whole world, I'm not going to fill and multiply and rule over creation for good. I'm going to consolidate power, and I'm going to show myself above God. Right? So we see the beginning of all languages. I don't know about you guys, but I really hate that one because I'm not good at languages. I'm trying to learn Spanish. Spanish is arguably easier than English, but I don't know Spanish, therefore English is easier to me. Right? So we have the challenge of language, right? We have the introduction in the beginning of idolatry, right? Where this idea of other gods comes from. Why are there these other belief systems? And of course, we have the beginning of the concept of the Messiah, right? God and His plan to redeem mankind. I love where Peter gets to, where he says, before creation, God planned a plan to save man. Right? It was before creation, and we see the unfolding of that plan that God had before He said, let there be light. And God said, let there be a cross. Right? And we see the unfolding of that plan and God's redemption all the way in the beginning. Right? And because of that, we have the beginning of prophecy. And we see some very important prophecies that take place in the very beginning of the book of Genesis. We also see the beginning of the nation state of Israel. Right? We see the beginning of where this people that God has set apart for His own devices to redeem humanity, and we see the beginning of all of that. So we have lots of beginnings in the book of Genesis. Of course, Genesis means beginnings. It comes, going back to the handout here, excuse me. The book of Genesis comes from the Hebrew word Bethshet, which is derived from the very first word in the book of Genesis, with his Resheth, meaning the beginning. Somebody quote for me, or somebody read for me the Bible. Start at the very beginning. Stop. Somebody else. No, start at the beginning. What does it say? In the beginning, God. If you don't believe that, nothing else that takes place in the beginning of Genesis, or in this book, is going to make any sense. The point of the book of Genesis is not to prove the existence of God. The point of the book of Genesis is to explain what God has done. In the beginning, God. That's the whole book of Genesis, wrapped up. And the name of the book comes from this concept of beginning. And the beginning is the start, that origins.
That's the question. Where do we come from?
Right.
That's the question that has, for millennia, people have, where do we come from? God.
Mm-hmm.
Again, God didn't come from that.
No.
He said we can't accept that, and the rest is very hard to accept.
It is. It is. It's very hard to accept. And this is why it's such an important study. It's such an important study for us to understand, because it explains the beginning of all things. Right? How are you going to have a proper view of human history? How are you going to have a proper view of the world around you if you don't understand where it all began? If you came in 20 minutes in to Endgame, if you guys, and some of you don't even know what I'm talking about, which is half of the point, right? Endgame is the very last movie in a 20, 30 video franchise of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And it goes, and it spans, what, 15 years, 20 years and hours of entertainment, right? Explaining and introducing character after character after character. And it all culminates in two movies, two blockbuster, 2+ hour movies each. And if you came in at the very last act of that whole thing, and you came in halfway through that movie, you'd be lost. Right? And some of you are lost at me even talking about the Marvel Cinematic Universe. What's that? We're talking about Captain America and Thor and all these characters, all these superheroes, right? Against the big bad villain, Thanos, right? And you're like, well, who's Thanos? That's the point. If you haven't watched hours upon hours of these movies, you wouldn't know. And in the same way, if you come in to the book of Matthew and you start reading these genealogies, your eyes are going to glaze over and you're going to go, what on earth is this talking about? It's not going to make any sense. But if you start at the beginning, it begins to make sense. That's why we study these things. And that's why it's important that we understand the large overviews of these books, because there is a point that is being made, and we can get lost in the weeds if we don't know where we are in the large scope of things, right? So it's really important that we kind of understand that. Now, the book of Genesis covers a span over 2,000 years. It is the first book of the Bible, and it covers one of the largest time frames that we as humanity know as very little about. There's a lot of speculation, there's a lot of thoughts about this time period, and nothing affirmative. And here Moses comes on the scene at the end of this time frame and says, now here's what's taken place over all this time. Now, the question then becomes, how does he know? How does Moses know what's taken place long before he came on the scene? And the answer is God. The big answer, the main answer to that question is God. God spoke to Moses as a friend. God was present with him at the burning bush. He was present with him upon Mount Sinai. He was present with him walking the people out of Egypt. Moses had a connection and a closeness to God that no one else outside of Jesus, right, who is himself God, had. So the big question, or the big answer to that question of where did this information come from, it's God. But it also came through the descendants of the Israelites who came out of Egypt, who had oral histories and oral stories and oral traditions that Moses was able to collect and ask God about and say, okay, is this true? Is this not true? And God then paints this beautiful story, and through the education that Moses received as a prince in Egypt, he's able to paint this beautiful story showing us where things are going, and it fits perfectly into the whole tapestry of the rest of Scripture. Right? So it's a really important point. And it does come down to this hinge verse where God is calling Abram and saying, I'm going to bless you in order to bless the whole nation, the whole world. I'm going to make you into a nation. I'm going to make you into someone great in order to bless the whole world. And it really is the hinge point of this book. Like I said before, it contains 50 chapters. It's large. It's a long book. But like I said, it's covering a huge swath of time. It's not going to answer all your questions. The book of Genesis will not answer all your questions. We come to the pages of the Bible with a set of questions. We come to this Bible with a set of wonders, going, okay, what's the point, and why is this, and what took place, and what's God's will, and we have all these questions. But the Bible records certain things in order to answer certain questions. Questions we may not be asking, and it will not answer all the questions we're asking. Right? So, for instance, we come and we say, okay, we want to understand how the world, the atoms and the molecules and the descendants came about, and we come to the book of Genesis, and we come to, say, the creation story, which we'll get into next week, with all these questions about how it actually happened. And we want to know for sure, and we have the scientific mindset. That's good, and it's righteous. But the book of the Bible, the book of Genesis, is not answering those set of questions. This is not a scientific textbook. It's not to say that it's not true. It's not to say that it's not explaining to us our origins. But its point is not to make a scientific argument for the origin of man. That's not its point. And we need to be careful when we come to the pages of Scripture and we seek to have it answer a question it never intended to ask nor answer, when we push it beyond its limit. So we have to be careful about that.
So basically, as I understand, you're saying that the things that we need to know are in the Bible.
Right. Yes, the things we need to know are in there.
But it doesn't solve all the questions that come to us.
No.
So if we have a question that the answer is not there, it really isn't important.
It's not critical. It matters.
All that we need for our life here, living our life here so that we can live our life there.
Right. Right. Everything that we need for life and godliness is here. Right? And there will be questions that we ask, and it's not that they're not good questions, it's not that they're not valid questions, it's that it's not the point of why this was written. right? So there can be some healthy debate, some healthy disagreement, some healthy wonder, some healthy mystery, walking away from the text. So it's super important that we understand biblical narrative and the type of writing that we have. When you pick up a novel today by any of the leading authors, he's going to begin by describing the climate of the day. And it was a cloudy day on a June, and he's going to, talk about the name. He's going to fill in all these details. You come to the pages of Scripture, and I don't care which book of the Bible, what page you turn to, that's not how this is written. The details that we expect are not in the text, but the details that are given are important to the text and the layout of the whole. Right? So when the Bible says that Goliath, for instance, was 6 cubits tall, that matters. That's a very random thing to throw out there, but it matters. And the question we need to ask is, why does it matter? Right? And the point of the text is not to give you his specification, so if you find his skeleton, you can grab a tape measure and you can go, yep, perfect, this is him. That's not the point. It's communicating a spiritual message by highlighting physical truth. Right? So it's important that we understand that the details that are given are there for a reason. The things that are being highlighted are highlighted for a reason. And it's also important to understand that as the Bible gives us information about individuals, it gives it to us raw. The perfect family, the Abrahamic family, has so many problems. So many problems. It is not an ideal family. It is not an ideal family, right? The Bible gives us these heroes of the faith with all their wrinkles and all their blemishes. And that's part of the point. Mm-hmm.
I've got a whole thing here that I've jotted down. I can't remember all of it.
Right.
But the real author is God.
Right.
And we're told that all Scripture is inspired. I like the word God-breathed. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
By God. Yes. Because that reminds us again how man came to life.
Right.
God breathed life into Adam. And we keep that in mind as we read things and we get these questions that may take us way off course.
Yep.
Is to come back and say, what does God have to say about this?
Right.
God doesn't say anything. God doesn't say anything.
Right. And we have to be more comfortable with the mystery sometimes. Right. We especially within the churches of Christ, we come out of a modern society. Not postmodernism, modernism. Modernism is very scientific and very methodical about how it seeks to answer the questions of the world, and it seeks to remove all mystery. Postmodernism seeks to restore the mystery to the point that facts don't matter. Right? How do you feel? What is true to you? Right? It's not about truth, it's about your feelings. The Bible is about both the Spirit and the truth. Right? So it is not modernism, all facts, all head, no spirit, nor is it postmodernism, all spirit, no truth. It is both. Right? So when asking the question, is the author making a spiritual point about Goliath's height, or is he making a physical point about Goliath's height? Yes. Which is true? Yes. Right? The point is not, I'm going to get a tape measure out and I'm going to find out that to the millimeter, he is this tall. That's not the point. But he is a tall guy who was indeed 6 cubits high. Now, what's a cubit? I don't know. We think we know. It's from here to here. Dana, you want to stand up here and we'll compare cubits. We're going to be off by maybe a hand width, right? The point is not the scientific down to the micrometer. The point is it's true, and God's communicating the point. Now, to that, we have a number of firsts, but let me answer this question.
So maybe I'm getting ahead of you, but whenever they built the ark,
Mhm.
you know, the Bible gives us, so that really means something to us, or does it mean that God told, Noah the specific measurements to build the ark, that that's what he must go by? Is that
Right.
what that means? You've got
Right.
me lost.
Yeah. No, it's a good question. So getting to the story of Noah and the ark, right? There are measurements given, right? Those measurements are true, right? That is the size of the ark. It's approximately,
God gives Noah those,
yeah,
and he said, go by the instructions.
right. So when God gives Noah those instructions saying, I want you to build it this large, that's the general size of what the ark is. Now, we're not going to be able to, from that material given, come up with an architectural drawing of exactly what the ark was like, and then be able to recreate it like, say, Answers in Genesis has off in Kentucky or wherever the ark encounter is. Not to say that's wrong, but that's not the point. There's an additional point, and we may never know fully what it is, that's being communicated by the measurements and the dimensions of that ark. And maybe the only spiritual point is God directs what is needed. That may be the only point, right? But there may also be a message being communicated by the numbers. And that may be very much obscured by us bringing it from the Hebrew into the English, right? For instance, when we read in our Bible that Goliath was 6 cubits tall, we don't read 6 cubits, we read 9 feet. Well, the number 9 completely loses its meaning on the spiritual meaning of that, right? So there's a challenge for us in the fact that we've translated this out. So my point is not so much that everything has a secret spiritual meaning. The point is, when the Bible gives us a fact, when it tells us a story, it's not just there for filling space. It's not just there because that was what the author wanted to talk about next. There's a reason that is there. For instance, when we get into the latter half of the book of Genesis, we're going to see 2 stories unfold side by side, and it's going to seem really weird because we have this favorite son of Joseph, who is godly and righteous and prophetic and all these things, and then his wicked, good-for-nothing older brother Judah is going to have this weird story with his son's wife. And it's going to be like, what's going on here? But there's a huge message being proclaimed there about the wickedness of Judah and God's redemptiveness in that bloodline. Right? So that story arc is so important. And if we're down in the weeds and we're just reading it verse by verse, we're going to lose that message. But there's a reason why those stories are living side by side. And we see that at the very end of the book, as Judah is proclaimed as the one through whom the messianic line is coming. And it's through that lens that we're able to look back at that story and go, okay, that's why this story is here. What does this teach us? Right? So there's both the spiritual and the physical that's going on.
We have this bird eye view from a far distance, and it's
Yeah, no, it's true. It's very true. All right, I need to put a pin in it, so let me give a number of firsts, and then I'll let you make.
I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay.
So is the Bible literal or not?
Yes.
Because I read the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, and it doesn't basically literally say that God wrote the Bible. Right? Christians, believers, right? They had prophecy, so they wrote it.
Yep.
So that's why I put you on the spot.
Yep.
So is it literal or is it not?
Yes, and the answer is yes, because the Bible is communicating a spiritual point about the world and about our God and about how we ought to live, but it's not communicating that through fable. It's communicating what truly happened, but it's highlighting what truly happened in order to communicate a spiritual point. Right? So if we only look at the Bible through the lens of a scientist, we are going to get it wrong. Okay? All right. I am over time. Let me give you a couple of these first that I thought about. Gives us the first man, the first marriage, the first garden, first sin. Gives us the first prophecy, the first murder. Gives us the first musician, the first metal worker. Gives us the first king, the first rain, the first boat, the first rainbow, and the list goes on and on and on. So the book of Genesis gives us a number of firsts as well. All right, I know I've opened a can of worms. I know I've gone over time. I appreciate your time and attention. We will get into Genesis 1 and 2 next week. There is a number of these handouts. Please let me know if you did not get them so that I can get a number for how many I need to print next week of these handouts, and I will try to get the proper number printed for the coming up classes as well. Thank you all for your time and attention, and let's visit and then we can worship.